I'm Marianne White LeBois, and my father is Stoddard White. And Stoddard started coming to Grand Lake because he was friends with Don Campbell. And basically, Miriam and Tom Campbell had him come so that he would keep the peace between Don and Dick. And so fortunately for him, being his father died in 1930, and so in 1931 was the first summer that he started coming with the Campbells, and then fell in love with Grand Lake. Sailed with the Campbells, sailed with the O'Donnells, sailed with Dudley Abbott. Whoever needed a crew or a skipper of a boat, he was the first one to offer. In 1950, Clarence Beagahole sold him property just down the way, which next door to Hosberg's, just this side of Hosberg's, so that he could join the yacht club, and sold it to him for $1,000. And he had a lean-to on that property so that he could truthfully say he had a house on the lake. And my mother thought that side of the lake was a little dark and a little cold and didn't really like the road, and the thought of staying all summer with small children, they decided not to build on that particular piece of property, and in 1965 he sold it to Jim and Betty Hosberg. I started coming to Grand Lake when I was a month old. Canton O'Donnell was very upset with my father that he'd left my mother and a brand new baby in Denver, so he sent my mother a dozen roses, drove down to Denver, picked us up, and brought us up here.
What year would that be?
1953. And Dudley Abbott let us stay in the boathouse. So after that, we stayed in Dudley's boathouse most summers, trading back and forth with David and Joanne and David and Susan and Carol. And Dudley put up chicken wire so we wouldn't fall through. And part of getting dressed in the morning was putting on your life jacket, because at that end of the lake it's cold and dark and the water's deep, and none of us knew how to swim when we were that little. One of my first memories of Dudley was he made a baby crib out of screens, and he hooked them together, which worked out pretty well. We couldn't get out, and couldn't get your head stuck, so that was really kind of sweet of Dudley.
Kind of like a cage.
It was. And Stoddard, young Stoddard, is my first memory of who was in the cage, and it kind of fit at the time. He was pretty funny. In 1959, we started renting a cabin from my dad's East High football coach, a gentleman by the name of Ken Julesrud. And it was up the hill from the Spider House. It's, where Weeby's house in the bushes. It's the Walters house that's up on the hill. And we rented that house from the time that I was 5 until I was 15. And it was a neat old house. It was like a lot of the smaller cabins that were built in the early part of the century. It kind of was a shotgun, and all the rooms connected, but one bathroom that had been added on when indoor plumbing was added on, I think. But it was a lot of fun. We had Holly Sumner in the Spider House, and Sissy Fry. They used to rent Whispering Pines, the Frys did. So Karen and Sissy and I would get together with the White House girls, who were the grand nieces of the lady who owned Topeka Wigwam, which is where the Jameses are now. So Mrs. Mitchell and the Lytles were a lot of fun. So we had Chubbs also rented Osage Lodge down in that little area, so we'd have little meetings in the open community space between all those little cottages. It was a lot of fun growing up. Holly and I and Rosie Rickardson, who's Richard Campbell's half-sister, would go to town, and when the library was up above the old firehouse, and we'd get Nancy Drew books and then sit in the window seat in the Spider House and read Nancy Drew, especially when it rained. That, and we'd tell ghost stories in the dark and scare each other half to death. But it was a lot of fun. That whole group of kids that our mothers called themselves the Ladies Marching in Powder Society. There was Barbara Thompson and Barbara Fry and Tib Chubb and my mom and Mac Sumner, and I might be missing one person, and they had little blue pastel t-shirts that had the initials of the Ladies Powder and Marching Society, and they took hikes, and Dee Dee Ward would take them berry picking and mushroom hunting. But mostly what I remember is having cocktails on the porch in the evenings while we were all doing other things, and you could hear them laughing all over the lake. So those ladies had a lot of fun too. They were the Grand Lake Summer Widows. They would all come and spend the summer with their children, and their husbands had to work in Denver or Topeka or whatever, and either came for Regatta Week or a couple weeks, or like my dad, came up on the Yampa Valley mail train every Friday night. So we go to Granby to pick Dad up in the train. And we'd also pick up Charlie Thomas and Francois de Chaudenay, people, because somehow their families didn't seem to know how to drive to Granby to pick up their dads, and my mom always was happy to do that for everybody. So it was a lot of fun. We used to put pennies on the track on Sundays and wait till after the train left and then see how smashed they were. And I still have some of those pennies, I think, in the house up here. So in 1967, the fall of 67, Mr. O'Connor called my dad and asked him if he was interested in buying his cabin, and that he wasn't going to leave it to his kids, and his wife was really sick of Grand Lake and it was time for him to sell, and he wanted to give Dad first crack at it. So we went over, and my dad made him a ridiculous offer, and he took it. So we got the O'Connor house, lock, stock, and barrel, and our first summer was the summer of 1968. So this is our 40th summer of being at the O'Connor house. It's a wonderful house. It was also a Hannington house. One of the originals was built in 1916. We've done a few things, but remodeled the kitchen and done some wiring and put in some heating, but really the majority of it is exactly as it was when we purchased it from O'Connor's, which I don't think they did a lot to it either over the years. But it's a wonderful old house, and the front porch is probably my favorite part. One of the things I love about being on different houses on the lake is the different views and different perspectives you get. Especially now with the trees being gone, you can actually really see some houses and prettier wildflowers, and everybody's front rooms seem to be warmer than they were when we were surrounded by the trees. But it was pretty. Sailing is a big part of our lives in Grand Lake, and I started sailing at 8 years old on the Falcon with David Abbott. My mother had a conniption fit because he had me lighting cigarettes at 8 years old so that we could figure out where the wind was. And obviously I didn't smoke at 8, so it was fairly comical to watch. I don't know how good of a ballast I was at 8 years old, because that's probably the littlest I've ever been in my life, so I didn't weigh a whole lot to balance the boat, but he was wonderful to me, and it was a great way to start sailing. I was a jib lady for my dad on our D boat, the Maggie. I was the first girl to win the Whistler races on Grand Lake, and I was the only girl skipper that year. There wasn't a cup, but George Peake was the Commodore. It was in August of '65, and he gave me a little Grand Lake medallion that I still have framed today. That was very sweet of him to do. But it was not an easy feat. My sister Jan was afraid of the cannon, and every time we'd get ready to start and they'd blow the cannon, she'd plug her ears and drop the jib, which would put us into irons in those little funny sailboats. But we did manage to finish first that year. I don't think we ever did that well again, but I wasn't a novice for too much longer after that. I was sailed for David Chubb on his D boat. I sailed with my first husband, David Winters, and probably one of the funniest stories involved his earlier girlfriend, Lori Whitehouse, was crewing for him, and David stood up, miscalculated, the boom came over, knocked him off the boat. Lori's holding on to the jib and didn't realize he was gone until the boat started going in circles, and she looked back and had no skipper. And she didn't know how to skipper, so fortunately the boat went over, and he was able to swim to the boat, get back on, and continue the race. But Stoddard and I were crewing for Dad on our D boat, and it was one of those blustery, really rainy, cold, windy days where everybody gets high side quickly. So I was hiked out over the side of the boat, and Dad said to my brother, balance the boat, which he did. The only problem was I was a little overweighted, and I did a beautiful back dive off of the boat. Well, in order to finish, you have to have all your crew, and my brother likes to tell the story that I had a wake behind me. I was swimming so fast to get to the boat because I didn't want my dad to be mad at me. I don't think we won that race, but we finished with all the crew, and I don't think I've ever been so cold in my whole life. I sailed with Scally O'Donnell the year that he and Bryant and my dad took turns being the skipper, and they managed to win the Lipton Cup. So that was the only time I got to go up and get the Lipton Cup, but I got to go up and get the second place cup on several occasions. And the Goodrow, we won the Goodrow Cup for the first year that it was on the lake for the Invitational back in sometime in the 60s with the Maggie. My dad was a good teacher. He really was. But probably my favorite person to sail with was Barclay Davis, because he had a heart of gold, was the best sport, and we always tipped over. Probably every race that there was any wind. But he and I and Roger Ferry decided in the summer of 1969 that we would start to teach children how to sail, because all of us had learned how to sail the hard way, by tipping over and praying and just figuring out what you needed to do. We didn't really know what the mechanics were, and how to skipper a boat got handed down from your dad or your big brother or from whomever was patient enough to teach you, and it really was on-the-job training. There wasn't any. It stuck you on a boat with a life jacket and said, "Here's what you do," and when I yell at you, do what I say. So we had a lot of fun. We used the Misty, which was Roger and Barclay's D boat, and we had a great time. I think we had 6 kids at the time, and I couldn't tell you now who they were exactly, but I was more interested in the boys that were my age than the little kids that we were working with. But it was a lot of fun. And then Sunny Hill thought it was a super idea, and the sailing school that we currently have now was born. So thanks to Sunny. There weren't a lot of girls my age up here. So Rosie Rickardson and Holly Sumner, Sissy Fry, and I were about the only. We had kind of divided age groups back then that don't matter anymore, but you sort of only went with your little group at that time, and I was one of the younger ones in our group. And it's kind of funny. So I dated Petey Hosberg, who was the heartthrob of the drugstore and the best water skier on the lake. And as hard as he tried to teach me how to do a jump start off the dock, I never did learn. But it was fun to watch him. But we did ski together, and he'd jump over my rope and over me and over both wakes, and I just sort of have to stand there and just let him do his thing. And our first date, I was probably 13, so I wasn't allowed to date. So Rosie stuck him in the front of their putt-putt and put a life preserver over him, and then Katie sat on the life preserver. So we would hide Pete, and they picked me up at our dock, and we went to the movies when they used to have the movie theater over in Grand Lake. And I just, that first love is just, you just don't ever forget that. And up here, it's just sort of was more magical because you had to make your own fun and your own. We hiked Shadow Mountain, and we hiked up to Baldy, and we water skied and got in a lot of trouble doing all kinds of things. He had a yellow and black Jeep, and I had a yellow and black pickup truck. And we used to cruise Main Street and Grand Lake and have water balloon fights on Saturday nights until somebody chases out either Buster Snyder, who was the policeman at the time, who'd also been a policeman in Denver and kind of had a reputation. But we did a lot of jeeping in my pickup truck, and probably took it off-road a few times when we shouldn't have because it didn't have four-wheel drive, but certainly had a lot of fun. The Commodore's Ball was probably one of my favorite things to do, and I probably shouldn't put some of the things that we did on tape for posterity's sake, but when you didn't have to leave when you were younger, and when we were young teenagers, it was really fun to hide from your parents and see if you could get somebody to slip you drinks. And I now realize how dangerous that is, but certainly thought it was a lot of fun when I was 16 or 17 and had dates. One year I was in charge of the teen dance, and the band didn't show. They had a flat tire on Berthoud Pass, and I was terrified that the whole teen party was going to come apart. And that one of the best bands in Denver just happened to be in town, and my house guest just happened to be one of their best friends. So he went into the Lariat and asked them if they would be willing to come play at the yacht club for this event for the exposure and $200, which is what we paid the band back then. So fortunately for me, they took pity on us, came, set up their equipment, and we had the Livin' Ends, which were the hottest band in Denver in the summer of '69, playing for the teen party. So it turned out to be a better event than it ever would had my friends gotten here, but it was kind of a neat memory just to remember. I also dated Tom Morrill. He and I had a lot of fun together when we were in our late high school, early college years, till his now wife Kim found out that we were dating, and she kind of put a kibosh on that. The summer romance didn't go over so well with her, and I can certainly understand why now that I've gotten to know her and think the world of her. But that's part of the joy of being up here, is the friends that you've had since you were born and the generations that mix together. And my father came with the Campbells, and I spent the night at the Campbells with Rosie. And now, my kids, Thomas Campbell's teaching my niece Natalie how to sail, and it's just so wonderful to watch all these generations grow up and expand. And some of the friends we have up here are the best friends I have and continue to be. And so it's one of the magic parts of Grand Lake, I think, is just the interconnections and how intertwined we are, and what a caring group some of the old crowd especially, I think, are. My mother said this summer, because she'll be 83 next month, and sitting at the cocktail party in the little corner, she goes, "I feel like Thelma Bigelow and Ruth Everest." And I laughed and said, well, Mom, you can be happy that you are 4 years older than Thelma Beaglehole was, I think, when she died, and you're just now feeling like she does. So the kind of the old guard, my mom wishes she was still my age, but she isn't. And it's kind of cute to just sort of see that passage of how we change, and where you were once up dancing at the ball, you're now sitting in the corner with earplugs, kind of wondering why you're there at all. The sailing school's been fun to watch with my niece Natalie. I had her here this week, and just what an incredible job they do, and how well organized they are, and how far that program has come, and the people that are responsible for making that happen. It just makes sailing much safer, I think, and much more approachable for these kids, and certainly something that they have a lifelong love of also, but understand the mechanics before they get turned loose on a boat, which is fun. Oh, let's see. Summer activities, we would have pine cone fights. Thank God not rock fights, but we would have little forts and we'd fight each other with pine cones. And sometimes it was the boys against the girls, or sometimes it was your side of the lake versus our side of the lake. We also, when it rains really hard and you get puddles in the road, we'd build Lego forts or houses and boat docks, and we'd have little pretend boats that we'd fly in the little ponds that made out of the puddles. And we'd tell all the drivers that would come by they had to go around our little pond so that they wouldn't run over our forts and our houses. Walking to town was a big deal. Your mom would give you a dime to go to Humphreys and get a phosphate at the soda fountain. And that was pretty fun. Miller's Amusement Center used to be an arcade that you could go to, and they even had these in-ground trampolines where the Lily Pet golf course is now. And that was in the early 60s, I would imagine, because then that property was a little valuable, I think, to have trampolines on there. But that's something I remember as a little girl. Isn't it funny what you remember? The barbecue was always probably one of my favorite things that we went to. And one year it was at the Little Buckaroo, which doesn't even exist anymore. It was a ranch, and we'd gone over with Dudley in the boat and then taken a car from the yacht club. I don't know if they bussed people up. I was kind of little, I can't really remember, but one of the things I do remember is coming back in the Merrimack Chris-Craft, and it was a horrible storm with lightning and thunder and waves, and we were under a tarp, and I just remember asking my mom if we were going to tip over in the boat. She said no, that Dudley was a good driver and that the Chris-Craft probably wouldn't tip over. But we got to sit on the edge of the wood stove when we got into the cabin to get warm, because it had been a really scary ride from the yacht club clear down to the east end of the lake. And storms certainly are something that we've all had to, on sailboats or in when the spirits come up for Venetian night every year and blow at 5 o'clock, predictably, or being on the top of Long's Peak with General Sumner and my dad and Holly, and we were coming down and we were in the boulder field and a squall rolled in with lightning, and you could feel that the fillings in your teeth were humming, and my dad's hair was standing straight up, and General Sumner said, take everything metal off and crouch like a cat. Well, I'm glad I climbed Longs that one time, because if that had happened, that was not my favorite experience, was being on the boulder fields, but I couldn't have been in better hands than with General Sumner and my dad. So we made it down safely, but that was a hair-raising, literally, experience. We did a lot of hiking in the park, up Hell's Canyon and up Mount Baker and Bowen, and climbing Baldy was always the thing you wanted to do at least once a summer. Tried to, and after I got to be about 13, I think was the first time I really felt I could make it all the way up there. And we used to go up in the Big Meadow and go fishing. I loved to fly fish, but I didn't really like worm dunking fishing. But my brother loved to fish, and he was afraid of suckers. So he would whistle for me to come down, because he'd fish down by the channel. And I'd come down and release the suckers and throw them back, and then rebait his hook, and he'd go back to fishing. So finally I figured when he was about 9 that he was getting too old to have his big sister come rescue him. Plus I didn't really like those smelly fat suckers either. So I finally taught him how to take them off, and if you want to be a real baby you could wear gloves, but he finally figured out how to do that. One of the tricks I learned up here was how to whistle through my fingers, and if you've ever heard me whistle, it's pretty loud. And we have Becky Burtis to thank for that. I spent probably 4 weeks just blowing air through my fingers all the time. I drove my poor mother nuts till finally one day I did it, but I had the misfortune of doing it in the car, scaring her to death, and she almost wrecked the car. But it comes in really handy to get people's attention, and I used to call my kids and scare away bears or would-be bears when you hear rustling and you aren't sure what it is. It's always a better idea to tell them to go away, I think. Dave and Pam Thomas. David Thomas used to come as part of the Fletcher Thomas family. He and I are actually gotten to be really good friends over the last 4 or 5 years, and they've come and spent time up here with me, and I've learned things from them that I never knew existed, as far as places to fish and hike and camp and do things, ride bikes. And when we're in our own little world, it was kind of what each of us liked to do, and there's so much opportunity here for things to see that I've done more probably as an adult, maybe even, than I did as a kid, as far as finding new places and exciting things to do. I'd love to go fly fishing down on Sheriff's Ranch on the Williams Fork. John Sheriff fortunately said that my dad, very few people get privileges to fish on their ranch, but he has a certain little book of people. And so after Dad passed away, I asked him if I could keep Dad's privileges, and he said that would be fine as long as I was, didn't do it more than 3 times a summer and put my name in the book and just let him know when I was there. So I have not taken advantage of that yet, but I need to do that one of these days soon. And I should have done it this summer, I guess, would probably been the best one for me to do that. We, funny stories, oh my gosh, one time I went to the movies with Larry Mann, and when we came out, the Thomas boys had put a dead, half-rotting fish on my steering, the gear shift column in my yellow truck, which was very nice of them, leave me a present. They rattled told us that they were bears, tried to make bear noises and jump out of the bushes and scare us, turn off the lights when you were telling ghost stories, or would throw things so you'd think there were animals outside. They were ornery, and had really fun parties in the Thomas's garage that are legendary. My mother didn't really allow us to go up there, but we always found a way to kind of get up there anyway. But lots of wild and crazy times at Grand Lake with all the Thomases and the Campbells and the Lavingtons, and they were a little younger than I was and a lot wilder than I was, I think, back then. I was the girls' rowing champion. We used to have rowing events for water sports, and I think I won for like 5 years in a row. Somewhere I still have the trophies. I'll turn over to Don Chubb and Karen Fry for posterity's sake, but I used to practice, and the trick was to put pieces of wire in the bottom of the oar so it wouldn't pull up loose from the oar locks, because that was what usually happened, is you start rowing really hard and you pull the oars out of your oar locks, and then you wasted precious time having to put them back in. So my dad, I don't know if that was cheating or not, but it worked out great. And I still have our old aluminum rowboat that I used to use. We lived in our putt-putts. That was the mode of transportation, that and your 2 feet. Because back then your mother didn't drive you to town, you walked, and you didn't have TVs, and you could listen to KOA radio. That was about the only radio station you could get up here in the summertime. And I just remember my mom made me iron, and I'd listen to some old geezer whose name escapes me at the moment, who had the original version of a talk show in the 1960s. But we all had chores we had to do. We had to chop wood and bring in fireplace wood. I was always the unfortunate one that got to do that, because my sister and brother were both a lot smaller stature-wise than I was back then. So my dad affectionately called me his piano mover, and a football player, and a fullback. They were meant to be endearing terms, but it was just because I was stronger than my siblings, I guess.
So you're the oldest of the 3.
I'm the oldest of the 3.
And how old is your sister? How many years younger, I guess?
Jan is 2, well, she wouldn't mind if we said how old she is. She's 2 years younger than I am, so she's 53. And then Stoddard was 51 in January. So the 3 of us are 3.5 years apart. And when Mom started coming up here to stay with us for the whole summer, I was 5, Jan was 3, and Stoddard was a year old. And as they're driving around the curve on the road right by the channel, Mom says, "Now you're sure there aren't any bears?" And my dad says, "I haven't seen a bear up here in years." And just then the bear walks up the hill. My mom looked at him and goes, So he busted Dad, but she was a trooper. She really was. And Clyde Eslick was such a wonderful friend to have for us. He would come over and fix things, or if there was something that had gotten in the wood shed, my mom was totally terrified. It was it might have been a little raccoon or a chipmunk, but it sounded like it was a badger. Clyde would come over and rescue us from the chipmunks, and he'd just laugh, and he'd put things together, and he was very good about keeping track of all the little summer ladies that were up there. But my mom was not a real risk taker, so for her to do that was really a labor of love, because my dad loved it here and the three of us loved it here, so she was a good sport. She really was. And we have a lot of wonderful memories thanks to their generosity, and being able to spend the summers here was magical. I mean, we didn't have to be in Denver in the heat, and we had a big swimming pool right out in front. Every morning we'd go to the Thomas's beach, and it would be Lucy Blickensturfer and Tom and Jim, and it would be Joe Thomas and Shelby and Bill, and Marge Thomas and Mark and David and Jeffrey, and the White kids, and occasionally a Fry kid, and then the Davises were there sometimes too, Carla and Barkley and Derek. So our moms would sit on the beach and drink coffee and talk to each other and work on their tans, and we'd all build sandcastles and swim and have water fights and just played in the water for hours. I can't put my big toe in it now without a wetsuit on, but I'd spend the whole entire morning there when I was a little girl. So we did that for a long time. I also babysat a lot of kids up here. I babysat for John and Bruce O'Donnell, both here and in Denver, for Jenny and Stephen Hill, for all the little Garnsey girls, Herrick and Diane Garnsey's kids, and then so it was really fun to be able to babysit those kids. And now some of them babysat my kids. Mm-hmm. But Jack O'Donnell, John's son, came up to me this summer and said, "Did you really change my dad's diapers?" I said, "I really did." He just thought that was so amazing that his dad was ever little enough to be a baby, and that some lady who was old enough to be his grandma had changed his dad's diapers. So that was kind of fun. So lots of just wonderful times, wonderful memories, wonderful people. Just some incredible memories of people like the Everests, and Ruth Everest was probably one of the loveliest ladies. She really was, and always really good to us, and very sweet. And Gertrude Hanna, who was Buff Winters, Lynn Scott's mother. They started coming up here probably about when your family did, Steve, in the mid-1800s. And her husband had been a country doctor in Emporia, Kansas, so he did a lot of doctoring up here. If anything happened, Doc Hanna, so he'd get people who chop things with an axe, go to hit the wood and chop their shin bones, and all kinds of neat stories he could tell about.
Now, is that the Hanna Cup?
Uh-huh. That was in the Hanna Cup. Is that Hanna?
That's the M20.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, they bought David in Winters in M20 and hoped he'd win it, but he never did. He was a bridesmaid a couple of years, but never a bride. And he tried to be a really good sailor, but he really wasn't a very good sailor. And so you have to be a really good sailor to win that cup. I think Sean Waters actually in Howdy Fry played back and forth with that one for a long time. So probably have the most names on there, those two, I think.
Probably, yeah.
I used to babysit Sean Waters too, and Jennifer and Toby. Not Toby, I don't think, actually. I think I was married before when he was born.
What about your children?
I have Katie, who's 30, almost 32. She's a member of the yacht club, but she doesn't get to come as much as she would like. And Nick is 27. And then my Michael is 21, so he'll become a member this year. And he's always the first one to offer to help. He was on the house committee this year. He helps put boats away. He loves Grand Lake and has found his little niche up here too. Katie loves it, and Nick, he really didn't get to spend a lot of time here growing up, so he doesn't have, I think, the same love for it as the other two do, unfortunately. But he's coming next week to help me put some shutters on. So he likes to come better and when it's quieter and not during the hubbub of the summer. He likes the off season, and when Grandma's not there. We love our grandma dearly, but sometimes it's a little easier on her and on us to split that time. So as you get older, you just aren't as patient, and I can totally understand. You're
Mhm.
used to your peace and quiet. And you add grandkids and their friends and to the dogs and things to the mix, it can get a little chaotic when you're used to that
Yeah.
quiet time. But they're great. My kids are just wonderful young people, and I'm very proud of them and
Okay.
wish they could be here more with me. It would be nice.